What's going on, you guys? It's your boy 3 Stickity Stacks in this thing, baby, representing Team Kings of Games. And bro, ooh, the clapping is happening, my boy. Like, oh my goodness, somebody about to spread them. Like this right here is that strong, it's that potent. Like Plunder is going crazy, you guys. Like, this deck, high key, had the potential from the jump. We all knew it was a very I would say cliche thing to say of, oh, it has potential, it just needs more support. But this deck was like good from the jump. We knew that it kind of struggled with its own gimmick, and that's what really held it back so much. It's such a strong deck that is so versatile. It's able to play in different styles and different tempos, and before it was so format reliant that it just didn't matter how good the support was or how good the deck was, that there were just certain matchups that it couldn't really do much. But now, post Photon Hypernova, this deck can do its thing regardless of who we up against. In addition to that, it got a huge boost in the terms of recovery. I mean, the deck was already pretty solid. It was very good with just consistently looping its cards. As long as you knew what you were doing, you would never run out of extra deck. And your main deck is pretty easy to manage too. However, now that we actually have, this is my boy right here. Now that we actually have Jord, we're just going to call him Lord, because who knows what his name's actually going to be when he comes out. So the Lord of the whole deck, it changes the dynamic of how the deck is able to be played, because knowledge is no longer a huge thing. It's like this deck, some decks really need knowledge of the matchup to be aware of what's prevalent. This was one of those decks where you had to have that or you just were not going to do good, because there's points of interaction when you're playing Plunder where the only opportunity you're going to be able to get a ship out is when your opponent's already started playing. So now you're playing reactively as opposed to proactively, because the plays that you wanted to stop had to resolve in order for you to get the attribute that you needed. Like, you have to let your opponent play sometimes. Only my Plunder players that are watching this video understand what I'm saying. Other people might just think I'm just like blowing hot steam or whatnot, but it's a really big deal that we don't need the knowledge now. It's good to know your matchups, but it's also nice that like we don't have to wait until it's almost too late to decide to actually start playing. You know, we can just get our engine established ASAP, no Rocky, and the deck has really strong turn 1 combos now. There's a crazy lock with Rivalry. It's just kind of insane that this deck has such good value, and its cards trade so well economically, and it plus is so hard. It OTKs on the follow-up almost every single time. And once this deck gets its loop going, it can have its board broken 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. And as long as you're playing the deck correctly and managing your resources, you will be able to reestablish the same exact board identical to the first one. It's really gnarly. The deck's super nice, and this card just establishes so many crazy loops. I'm really feeling it. I really am. It's fabulous. Honestly, it really is. So let's get into it. Before we get started any further, I know all the rambling, might annoy some people, but before we go any further, if you haven't done so already, definitely consider subscribing to the channel. Leave a like if you liked the video, leave a dislike if you didn't, and definitely consider becoming a member of either the Patreon or the Discord. Both have their own exclusive benefits that only come with being a part of those. So get involved if you're down. But here's the list. So as far as consistency goes, this deck really doesn't have good-looking starters, right? A lot of it is combinations of cards just working together. That's how the deck is. It meshes. It doesn't really... No, well, it can, but I don't really just make boards with my Plunders. I mean, you can even more than ever, but I play this deck very reactively. I play it just like shit-alls. I really don't set up turn 1 boards most of the time. I set myself up to be able to play on my opponent's turn, as opposed to like a conventional combo deck that will just make a board and pass and just use the cards that you have to just prevent your opponent from playing. This deck will get a little bit out, and then it'll just get the rest out if necessary when you see what matchup you have. Because the thing with this deck is, it kind of does sound counterintuitive, because I did say like the information and the knowledge of the matchup is not really as important, but it still kind of matters. Because if you end with certain ships and they don't interact properly with the archetype your opponent's playing, then you just wasted resources to make a board that really is not going to be hard to break, because you don't have any cards that interact properly to prevent them from killing you or from establishing their deck's main goal, the engine. So I think ultimately what you're always going to end on no matter what when you're playing this deck is always going to be Blackbeard. I think this is the most important card. because he is essentially any of the ships you need him to be in the moment that it's the most impactful, if that makes sense. Other than that, I'm just like blind dwellering, or like if I know I'm playing control, I'm gonna like summon Dragite. Most of the time, you're sitting on like literally just Dweller Captain. You can play Bahamut Shark Toad. That's a really safe line. It doesn't hurt. I like my flex, I like my text, and I like the third more than slapping in more generic cards. I play what comes up the most for me, and honestly, the way the extra deck's set up, not really gonna change it. I might put a second Lord, but it really just, it's been perfect. It really has. So these are the 6 consistency cards of the deck. It looks weird, but the deck's really consistent. These are the quote-quote starters. They're like 1-card enablers, but there's so many ways to get to Blackbeard, and ultimately Blackbeard literally is like the heart and soul of the deck. He allows you to do so many crazy things. There's a lot of interactions that this deck has that are not going to be noticeable on pen and paper. You have to play it for a little bit to understand. But once you do, you'll realize that this deck actually has a really, really strong tier matchup. It's always been good against Sprite, and it's always been kind of crazy against Sword Soul and Dragon Link. And even playing against Branded, I just feel that with Branded, the biggest thing for you is worrying about Mirror Jade. The in-phase Mirror Jade can be a problem because not only is it about like you're breaking their board, right? But like everything that you commit, you're not going to be able to end with it. So like in the Branded matchup, it's super duper imperative to end with a actually hard summon Mork. Something else that I tested was taking out 3 Veilers and putting in 3 copies of Parallel Exceed, just to allow me to be able to consistently end on a hard summon Mork or a Dweller more often. Because when I know the matchup, I understand that Mork equipped with Emblem is just GG no re for a lot of different decks, because it's like they can interact with you if they want, but a lot of the cards that they can use don't threaten you. And on top of that, most of the ways that they have to get rid of Mork now just don't exist. So it's just, they exist, it just doesn't exist in their deck. It's just crazy. So there's just like a lot of testing that I think you have to put into this deck. This is a deck that can really thrive if you give it a lot of your time. It's not like a deck that you can just pick up, like for example Tier Sprite, and you can just get straight to playing it because so many people play it and you've seen it played so many times. Not only is it not very popular, but there's not a lot of people that truly understand the depth and magnitude of how this archetype really functions. And that's just kind of just what it is, because it is a rogue deck technically, but it's very, very popular, and the people that like this deck and know it, they understand what I'm saying, that this is a trial and error process when you get to playing this deck. So you see the list. Most notably, the only thing that's kind of different from my lineup is I've always played 3 Redbeard, even when I'm not playing Desires. I just see Redbeard and Whitebeard as essentially kind of like opening Golden Hair, except she lets you end on Blackbeard, but Whitebeard and Redbeard are like the only plunder monsters that you can just pass on and they actually do something. The rest require a combination of cards to be functional, and that's one of the things with this deck. It is consistent, yes, it does have starters that are good, but most of the time it's more of like a combo that gets you into your engine and allows you to play on your opponent's turn. And most of the advantage this deck generates and the value you get out of the archetype is through activating and interacting with using your ships against your opponent's cards. That's like where you're going to get the true value. Sometimes your opponent cannot play, and it's actually a bad thing for you because you can't aggro them on the follow-up. You can't really get enough pressure to kill them. You have to have cards to interact with, and that's what's so important about this deck. That's why, again, I can't stress enough how vital it is to just understand the matchup, and also to try your best not to going into the build-a-board kind of mindset. You're more so setting yourself up to actually play and interact on their turn as opposed to making a board. But the Plunder lineup is pretty straightforward. I don't think any of these should be cut, in my opinion. In my experience, the more Plunder cards I open, the better, especially the monsters. They play around so much. There's so many different interactions where you're breaking boards with just straight up engine, bruh. Like, I'm not even capping. Like, this card stays in my extra deck forever and a day because I clap people all the time chain blocking White Orwell, and I'm just like, nobody's freaking playing Veiler. Maybe in new format they're going to, but like nobody's playing like Veiler Imperm, and most people just don't know what these cards do. They always negate the wrong thing. They always think you're going to go into a Plunder monster and you summon this guy with like a Whitebeard. It's just kind of cray-cray because you nuke their board and then just go straight into Blackbeard. And like Blackbeard is just kind of crazy by itself. Just like sitting him on the field, if your opponent tries to like Solic you, you could just chain Blackbeard, target the monster that they're trying to Solic, and just bring out a ship, and then that monster resolves too. There's just like some gnarly interactions that this deck has, and it really just comes down to experience. This is a deck that's only going to be as good as the player is and as their experience goes in the field in regards to knowing their matchups and knowing when to interact, because you have to be able to summon your ship and then interact. So one of the worst things that you'll get to experience for yourself when you start playing this deck is like, you will be summoning out your negator as a chain resolves, and the card that you wanted to negate is already resolving as part of the chain that your negator comes out. And that's just one of those things where, like, the more you understand the decks that you're playing against, the better you will get at your timing, because you're never going to want to just shotgun an effect that brings out a ship. You just want to know which one to summon for that point of interaction, but in order to do that, you have to watch your opponent play and see what they're trying to do. Or if you already have the knowledge of the matchup, then you know exactly when to do it and how to do it, and you don't even have to think that much. So it's a great deck, but I think that it has a huge ceiling. Like, I think it has a huge skill, like a high skill level, or like it just has a high skill gap, like where you just can't really like just pick this deck up and play it like an average deck. But I do think that when you're really, really good with this deck, especially with Lord out now, there's never going to be a time where you're really going to struggle. Even when you lose, it's going to be a glorious defeat, because this deck always puts up a good fight. It has a really, really strong kind of defensive utility where it's just really hard to kill, and a lot of the times that's what it comes down to, is like, if you can't kill this deck, it will kill you. So this deck profile is more just to inform those who don't know, because if you really want to see the list, it's there in front of your face. That's the benefit of like these videos on my laptop, is I can talk more about what really matters. It's like the juice and the berries, as opposed to just the skeleton, which is just the deck itself. And hand traps that I think are going to be good this format are no doubt going to be Nibiru. Literally, I've seen so many Kashtira decks, and I've never seen them put up anything that interacts with Nibiru, ever. I've seen some Brave variants, but I've seen more times than I can count a Kashtira deck going off, and they just literally, I'm just like, bro, this combo is so good. But if I had a Nib with no other hand trap, I would just win right now. So I think it's really good against tier. Some people are still even playing around Super Poly to this day. They will not end on Dweller, Rube, Kalos. So because of that, they're not summoning Rube, Kalos. And yes, the deck can play past Nib, but again, it's all about timing. It's all about knowledge. When you know that they've used all of their effects and they're getting ready to pass, Nib is kind of crazy, especially just plus anything else. Nib goes crazy. Now it's like they need Havness or another way to put a tier body on the field, or even their back row is dead. So I just think this card's great. Against Flunder, it's not, but a lot of hand traps don't work against Flunder. That's why I play Ash, Imperm, and Veiler, because these are good against Tier, Kashtira, and Sprite, and they're also great against Flunder. Ash, more notably, is kind of a high impact hand trap in that matchup for some reason. Because there's other times where you just really won't get the chance to, and essentially like Ash, a well-timed Ash in the Flunder matchup prevents them from sometimes even being able to chain block and snowball the advantage that they need. But then there's other instances where these are the only cards you can use. But I do like Ash because it's a good hand trap to draw early to stop them from getting their setup, and these are good if they already have their setup and they're not trying to like dig and RNG into it, if that makes sense. And I like main deck Fear. I think this card goes crazy against everything that's not Flunder, but Flunder is freaking Flunder for a reason, my boy. Double Talent, I think it's a great card this format. I think it's going to be a great card in the new format. I think that this card is underwhelming in the eyes of most players, but I really just see true potential in this. It's crazy against Cash. It's crazy against Tier. It's insane against Flunder. Some people are getting really like wise to what I do, but most of the time I just go inner main phase, lead main phase, inner battle phase, and they're like, before you leave main phase, boom, they play into talents, they flip the trap, they summon, and I just take their imp in and I smack over the barrier statue and just keep playing. And then 3, Rivalry. This is also because you can lock your opponent out with Lord. The Lord of all the Plunder Patrol ships, this guy can literally just give them a fat token. For a level 4, 0 attack, 0 defense. It's fat, baby. Like, oh yeah. Run them cheeks for me, baby. But you give them the token, you flip Rivalry, and it's literally like, it's not like they could just normal summon and then link into a fiend. It's like, the first monster you commit to your field had better be a fiend, but it's kind of like, who's really going to be able to out that lock without drawing non-engine or a specific way to counterplay it, because every deck that's like meta relevant has nothing to do with fiends. So I really like this luck. It's kind of like rivalry plus zombie road. It's a very, very similar kind of thing. I like it a lot. And the extra deck is how I want it to be. The only thing that's debatable is Mork being cut and also White Orwell being cut. But I cannot stress enough how many times like I've literally just had to summon Mork just to be able to like resolve this guy so that I can draw and then continue my lease loop, because I loop lease with Blackbeard. So I'll literally just go summon effect and then effect bring back Blackbeard, and then on my turn effect summon and then bring it back. And there's a lot of times where like you literally can't summon any other shit but Mork, and you're in that point where like you don't have the cards that you need to recycle the Mork. Like you can't just put it back and then summon it. Like it literally comes up so much. I have to play 3. I don't know about y'all. And then double Brawn. This card's kind of crazy. I'm not gonna lie. Like it's ridiculous. It's so good against tier their field spells. It's really, really good against Plunder. This deck really does bully Rogue. Best card right now. Honestly, it's the best card in the entire extra deck. It's too much. Dragite, White Orwell, Dweller, and also Almirage. You can make space for stuff like Toad. You can make space for stuff like Bajushka, the sleepy fat boy. But it's totally up to you guys. This is player preference, and this is also predicated to my experience when I play the deck. So don't look at it as this is the list that everyone should play. Look at it as these cards right here are the cards that you should work with, and then these cards right here are the cards that give you the flexibility and space to modify the deck to however you feel it needs to be. Whatever you think your deck's lacking, whatever you think your deck is gonna be underperforming, like if there's just a weakness that your engine cannot counterplay, I definitely always recommend preparing your main deck first so that you don't lose game 1s consistently. That's an L that you have control over when you build your deck right. Game 2 and 3, you don't really have so much control over, but game 1 is probably the most pivotal, like, in the entire duel. So that's why I build my decks the way I do. Thank you guys so much. God bless you. Make good choices. Don't hurt your brain cells. Deuces as well, baby.